West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Here's a little quiz. Can you identify these three gentlemen? If your idea of a fun party is identifying recent lesser-known government officials, then this is a fun party, right? You got it? Know who these guys are? Yes, they are all former U.S. Treasury secretaries. One Treasury secretary from the George W. Bush years, and the other two are from the Obama years. If you got that, congratulations, you're going to kill it at your next pub quiz trivia night, right? Of course, one of the things that Treasury secretaries do is they have to travel around the world to discuss financial stuff. Occasionally, for example, they have to travel to the Middle East, to the Persian Gulf countries to talk oil prices or to encourage investment in the United States or whatever. These are all photos of those three Treasury secretaries visiting the Persian Gulf states. But there aren't all that many photos of them because there weren't all that many of those trips. Those three guys, over the space of a decade, over two different administrations, all three of them together visited the Persian Gulf states 8 times. 8 times in total between all of them. Now, how about this guy? You recognize him? A little more recent. Guy who held the same job, Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin. During Trump's one term, during the 4 years he was Treasury Secretary, you know how many times he went to the Gulf states? At least 18. The last three guys went 8 times in total between them. Mnuchin went 18 times just himself. That's a 12-hour transatlantic flight to visit his friends in the Gulf, probably more often than you visited your friends who live across town. I mean, his three predecessors, 8 times combined over a decade. Mnuchin, 18 times in 4 years. Why is that? Well, new reporting from the New York Times suggests one answer to that question. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin was visiting Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Qatar and Kuwait to scare up new investments. For himself, not for the United States, which is a thing that's called self-dealing, and it's a thing that we're not supposed to do. Last month, the New York Times reported on truly remarkable sums of cash that the various Gulf monarchies had invested in private projects being run by Steven Mnuchin, as well as projects for Trump's son-in-law, White House advisor Jared Kushner. And the monarchies started paying out these funds almost as soon as those guys left the Trump administration. Last year, after Trump was out of office, the Saudis gave Steven Mnuchin $1 billion for his new investment fund. They gave Jared Kushner $2 billion. And they did this even though Saudi Arabia's own investment advisors explicitly recommended against it in writing because they determined that Kushner had no experience, he had no other investors, their due diligence on Kushner's operations showed that they are, quote, unsatisfactory in all aspects. But still, the Saudis gave $2 billion to Jared. Why is that? Well, his father-in-law's administration had bent over backwards for 4 years to try to protect Saudi interests, starting with making Saudi Arabia Trump's very first foreign trip as president, something no president had ever done and no other president ever will. Trump and Kushner and Steven Mnuchin defended the Saudis' autocratic de facto ruler after he rounded up and imprisoned hundreds of royal family members, after he started a blockade of the U.S. ally in Qatar, after he signed off on an operation to kidnap and ultimately murder and dismember a Washington Post journalist. All that favor and protection over the course of 4 years has got to be worth something, right? A couple $2 billion at least, especially if Donald Trump might be president again one day. So there's this sort of implicit quid pro quo in that situation. Hey, remember how good you were when you were in office? Well, how about, remember how good our administration was to you when I was in office? Well, now how about you put some money in my pocket? How about you invest in my new project? That quid pro quo with Kushner in particular is icky enough, but this new reporting from the Times suggests that Kushner and Mnuchin may have actively been using their government positions to tee up these money-making enterprises for themselves once they left office. Right before the 2020 election, Kushner and Mnuchin unveiled a new U.S. government-backed investment fund that would ostensibly raise billions of dollars for projects in the Middle East. All through the end of the Trump presidency, Kushner and Mnuchin kept flying all over the Middle East on the taxpayers' dime, trying to raise money for this supposed government fund. Jared made 3 trips to the Middle East just in the weeks between the election and the inauguration of Joe Biden. And when the January 6th attack happened, he was on his way back from Saudi Arabia, and Stephen Mnuchin was on his way to Saudi Arabia. Mnuchin ultimately cut his trip short because of the Capitol attack, but he did stretch it out still just a couple more days to try to squeeze in one more meeting with the leader of Saudi Arabia. Here's the thing, though. All those meetings were supposedly about this U.S. government-backed investment fund. The Times describes it as, quote, little more than talk. With no accounts, no employees, no income, and no projects, the fund vanished when Mr. Trump left office. Except Kushner and Mnuchin did later raise billions from all those countries they were scrambling to visit in their last months in government. They just didn't raise it for any U.S. government fund, which appears to have never really existed. They raised it for themselves. Just 3 weeks after leaving office, Mnuchin was talking about a plan he had. A few weeks later, he had detailed investment plans on $500 million from the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, and the Qataris. $500 million from each of them. All these folks he had just been fundraising from as Treasury Secretary. Then came the billions from Saudi Arabia. Mnuchin and Kushner both took the government officials who had ostensibly been working with them on this government project and installed them at their new private ventures where they would get the money. In April of last year, when Mnuchin sent the Saudis a roster of the top executives at his new private venture for them to invest in, one of the managing directors was still, at that moment, employed by the U.S. Treasury Department. I mean, this isn't even like speeding up the revolving door between government and the private sector. This is like there's no door. It means you go to work for the U.S. government, and in the name of the U.S. government, you raise money for yourself. On the one hand, it feels like, another bit of corrupt detritus from the Trump administration that is stuck to our collective national shoe. On the other hand, this feels like something so blatant it cannot possibly stand. Can it?
It is Tuesday, the 24th of May of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. You know, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world, and you can go ahead and use the Spanish paprika. It is equally as good as Hungarian, or one might say the Hungarian is equally as good as the Spanish. It's just that there's lots less of the Spanish paprika, and that is why it is so expensive. But go ahead, feel free. All right, well, what another day. It's primary day in some states like Georgia. Are we gonna have Marjorie Taylor Greene to kick around anymore? I hope not. I'd like her to go back to being a private citizen, and she can ambush people like she was before she was elected. She actually ambushed the Hogg kid from a survivor from the Parkland shooting. Accused him of being a crisis actor. That's where her head is at. You think space lasers was bizarre. Yeah, before she was elected, she literally had a camera crew and ambushed David Hogg on his way to a hearing about the Parkland shooting, accused him of being fake. The cruelty knows no bounds, and ignorance is no excuse. It's about time we went back to our old values. Boy, now, I'm ignorant of any crime being committed. Oh, you mean that's a crime? Yeah, did you hear that 5 of the top 10 GOP candidates for governor in Michigan, looks like they criminally and fraudulently acquired signatures, and now they won't be able to run. We'll see, though, because it's Republicans. All right. They can do anything and get away with it. Break the law, beat up their wives, beat up their mistresses, pay off somebody, drop women off to have abortions, and then go and vote against abortions. Republicans can do anything they want. Hunter Biden sells a painting for what a bunch of people who know nothing about art say is too much. He sold it for too much. And yet, Kushner getting $2 billion from the Saudis doesn't even raise an eyebrow. $640 million while working in the White House. Crickets. Hunter Biden made $11 million in 5 years. And now we have to live under a fascist regime because of that. It's just too much. Amazing, isn't it? You know, Quakers, 80-year-old Quakers, cannot get away with planning an anti-war protest without getting busted and thrown in jail before the protest. And now we have Tucker Carlson saying, the DHS wants to monitor white supremacists. That means that they're going to monitor my audience. Well, damn right, mofo. Someone's got to. It's not Antifa out there killing all these black people and Jews in their synagogues and black people in their churches and their stores and Asians riding the subway. Shopping for Tangelos. I'm going to go beat up some old Asian women. They're buying Tangelos. And nary a word against that. Some maggot was asked down in Georgia about the problems that his representatives have fomented. His response was, doesn't matter. Even a criminal on our side is better than the commie Democrats. Now, I call it brainwashing. Is it? Or are they already predisposed to that type of sentiment? Were they groomed? Well, that's a form of brainwashing now, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Southern Baptists are embroiled in their sex scandal now. Cover up. Yeah, it's just not for Catholics. They tried to make it sound like that. Oh, all those terrible priests. Yeah, well, what about all those Southern Baptist ministers? There is an old joke. The only reason you become a Southern Baptist minister is so you can cheat on your wife and have all the sex in the world. Just not with kids. All right? Now, whenever I see somebody who purports to be a Baptist youth minister, I'm like, have they checked that guy's pedophilia bona fides? Because I don't know. All right. Well, they keep getting away with it, don't they? They even pass laws to lower the age of marriage so that some, 50-year-old guy can claim a 13-year-old and say, that's my wife. Goes back to the old days. Well, in the old days, you probably wouldn't live to 50. All right? You want some originalism? Let's get it then, okay? Okay. Well, we do have a curated show for you today, as we do every day, Monday through Friday, here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. But I feel compelled to remind everyone, as part of the show, indeed. Well, at the top, that new report revealed how shameless self-dealing by Kushner and Mnuchin with the Sauds and others. But we got to hear about $11 million that Biden made in 5 years. Small businesses would consider themselves to be a failure to make that much money. We only made $11 million in 5 years. We're going to have to close up shop. We're a failure. Jeez. All right. On the rest of the menu, today's election in Georgia marks the biggest test yet of new voting restrictions enacted by Republicans. Not many people charged with felony crimes can go 7 years without ever standing trial, but Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is one. And a new Department of Justice policy stipulates federal agents have a duty to intervene if they see other law enforcement officials using excessive force. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Nancy Pelosi warned Britain there would be no trade deal unless they respect the Northern Ireland peace deal. And the head of the UN World Food Program chief pressed billionaires to step up. Yeah, we're looking at you, Musk. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. She will be at Netroots Nation this year, so stay tuned for that. Coming up, by the way. To the left of that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And please do become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. When you do, it really helps us pay our bills and fly under the radar. You know, if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds to us once a month, we're able to stretch those dollars beyond compare and fly under the radar. And when you fly under the radar, apparently we can get away with lots. Almost like we're Republicans. Almost. So please do help us because, hey, we need the help. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. Actually, that's automatic. I just put it in the queue, choose the time, date, and hit publish, and then it will automatically put it up 10 minutes before showtime. Where I have the trouble is then linking it up before showtime on Twitter and other social media platforms. A lot of times, it's when the opening clip has already begun. I apologize. But the show notes and links are where you can find the real reportage. Don't rely on me. All right? Now, I might have some opinions about the accuracy of the reporting or even something as benign as syntax. But the articles are there for your perusal, so peruse. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West. And pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, really wherever podcasts can be found. And the deep archive of the Netroots Radio Library, in which West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is a part, can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. Oh, I should mention about podcasts. I've been a little late in getting podcasts podcasted. I've been taking care of my mom, as you know, but she actually now requires a lot more looking after. So sometimes I get behind on other aspects of my life. But mom comes first in this situation, and she's doing okay. I mean, she has some mental decline, and that's a concern. Day before yesterday, she was in her room and somehow fell and smacked the back of her head and had a big old knot. So, I might have mentioned that. I got so tired because I was up about every hour and a half to 2 hours to make sure that she didn't have a concussion and was slipping into a coma. You hate to have that happen. So I didn't get much sleep the night before last. So I apologize for not getting these podcasts up in as timely a manner as folks have become accustomed. I'll try to get back to the usual schedule, but sometimes time management is managed with priorities, and I apologize. Sometimes the podcast isn't such the prime priority as it once was. Okay. Enough excuses. Let's get into the curated part of the show. Oh, yeah. Here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Now, remember, save some room for the amuse-bouche at the chef's table. Okay? That's coming up at the end. All right. Oh, I have not opened up this first tab to be able to give you the rundown on who has penned this piece, which is out of the Associated Press by Christina A. Cassidy. Today's election in Georgia marks the biggest test yet of new voting restrictions enacted by Republicans in one of the nation's most important battleground states as voters decide hotly contested primary races for governor and the U.S. Senate. Election officials, poll workers, and voters were navigating new rules put in place by the GOP-controlled legislature and Republican governor after the 2020 presidential election amid a concerted effort by Trump to cast doubt on his loss with unsubstantiated claims of fraud. So they just decided to put, you know what? Really, too many Democrats really did vote. We got to stop that. They added restrictions to mail voting, limited drop boxes, and changed rules that could make it harder for voters who run into problems on Election Day to have their ballots counted. That's despite no evidence of widespread fraud that would have changed the results of the 2020 presidential election in Georgia, a state Joe Biden won by about 11,800 votes. Of course, the fraud that was attempted to be perpetrated. What? Anyway, the fraud was by Trump when he called up Ravensburger and said, "I want 11,801 votes." Voting groups were watching for long lines, voter confusion, problems with voting equipment, or any other hitch that could hinder voters from casting their ballots. Even handing somebody a bottle of water is jail time for you and whoever drinks the water. Just don't call it racism. Today's voting capped a record-setting early voting period in Georgia. Nearly 860,000 ballots have been cast through Friday, the majority of which were done in person as opposed to mail. Think of that. State election officials said the early turnout marked a 168% increase from the 2018 primary and a 212% increase from 2020. Republicans have touted the early voting numbers as evidence that the Georgia law known as Senate Bill 202 has not harmed voters. Once again, facts are disproving the left's voter suppression narrative, said Jason Sneed, executive director of the Honest Elections Project Action. That means dishonest. They're a conservative group that supports tighter voting laws. Georgia was among 3 states, along with Alabama and Arkansas, holding regular primaries today. Texas has runoff elections for the GOP primary for Attorney General and for a Democratic congressional seat, while Minnesota is holding a special primary for the seat of former Republican U.S. Representative Jim Hagedorn, who died in February. Georgia, along with other states that have held early primaries, has seen a dramatic decline in the use of mailed ballots since the record numbers reported in 2020 at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when voters were seeking alternatives to crowded polling places. Now, we all know you can't hack a paper ballot. Why do they want to get rid of paper ballots? Voting advocates said the new Georgia elections law has made it harder to request a mail ballot by shortening the period voters can apply for one and by adding new ID requirements to the applications and the ballot itself. Trump's unsubstantiated attacks on mail ballots also have a toll on voter confidence, which is all part of the plan, isn't it? As of Sunday, about 64,600 mail ballots had been returned out of nearly 97,000 requested by Georgia voters. About 1,300 applications have been rejected for arriving past the new earlier deadline, or 1.4% of all applications submitted. Those voters, if able, can still vote in person on Tuesday. Texas primary voters in March were tripped up by new identification requirements, resulting in an abnormally high rate of mail ballot rejections. And lawmakers in Alabama and Arkansas also shortened the period for those requesting absentee ballots. Paul J. Weber and Jack Bleiberg of the Associated Press bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Not many people charged with felony crimes go 7 years without ever standing trial. One of them is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. The twists and turns of how the Republican, who was on the cusp of winning the GOP nomination for a third term today, has yet to have his day in court after being indicted on securities fraud charges in 2015, has little comparison in American politics, and along the way, it has upended what it means to be a compromised office holder in Texas. 4 different judges have overseen his case at some point, where a trial would happen, if it ever does, as ping-pong between Dallas to Houston to Dallas again. All the while, other clouds have gathered over Paxton. The FBI is investigating him over separate accusations of corruption, and the State Bar of Texas is weighing possible reprimands over his attempts to baselessly overturn the 2020 election. Once, nearly a year passed with no movement in the case at all. No single reason explains the delays, but altogether, Paxton has become an example of how powerful allies and acts of God can drag out career-threatening criminal charges and allow a politician to rise above being written off as a political gunner. "I mean, this one is crazy," said Andrew Wheat, a leader of the watchdog Texans for Public Justice. His group, in 2014, filed a complaint with prosecutors over Paxton's failure to register as a securities advisor, one of the criminal charges the Republican is battling. Wheat is dubious that a trial will ever happen, and by the time it does, if it ever does, he said, will it have any significance left to it? Paxton, who faces 5 to 99 years in prison if convicted, has pleaded not guilty. His attorneys point out that Paxton invoked his right to a speedy trial and blames the holdup on special prosecutors who have spent years in a protracted battle over how much they're getting paid and where the case should be tried. How much the case matters is a question Texas Republicans have arguably already answered. They don't care if their own people commit crimes, as long as those baby-eating Jewish laser commies are not ever in office. Paxton was reelected in 2018 when the felony charges were still making front pages. He is now in reach of winning the nomination again. Today, in a runoff against Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush, yeah, one of those Bushes, who finished second in a four-way primary in March, but still 20 percentage points behind Paxton. Bush, the son of Florida Gov. Jeb Bush, and the last of his famous family still in office, has staked a comeback on TV ads that splash the indictments across the screen and calls Paxton unfit for office. Paxton has mostly ignored the attacks while flaunting Trump's endorsement. Most top Texas Republicans have been restrained in voicing any concerns, but a rare exception came just days ahead of the runoff when Senator John Cornyn called the unresolved case an embarrassment. The indictments accuse Paxton of defrauding investors in a Dallas-area tech startup by not disclosing he was being paid by the company called Servergy, and he was there to recruit them. The indictments were handed up just months after Paxton was sworn in as Texas's top law enforcement officer. Not long after, allies of Paxton spearheaded attacks on special prosecutors' $300 hourly rate, calling it an abuse of taxpayer money. Of course, that's what lawyers have always charged. I don't know what the problem is here. But anyway, local leaders in Paxton's hometown of Collin County, which is controlled by Republicans, agreed and voted to slash the pay. You know, like corruption. Since then, the criminal case has inched along, a court system brought to a standstill by the 2017 hurricane, and then the pandemic slowed the pace even more. As it stands now, prosecutors are waiting on Texas's top criminal court to rule on an appeal to address payment issues and keep Paxton's case in Houston. In the intervening years, Paxton has drawn new scrutiny after 8 of his top deputies accused him in 2020 of abusing his office to help a wealthy donor, Nate Paul, resist an earlier FBI investigation of the developer. Both federal probes continue, with investigators in recent months collecting Paul's business records and asking how the developer might have been paying Paxton. Paul, whose lawyers did not respond to requests for comment, has denied bribing Paxton. The Attorney General has broadly denied wrongdoing, and his lawyers declined to comment on the FBI investigation. Devlin Barrett of the Washington Post brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Justice Department has updated its use of force policy for the first time in 18 years, telling federal agents they have a duty to intervene if they see other law enforcement officials using excessive force, a change that follows years of protests over police killings. The new policy is outlined in a memo issued by Attorney General Merrick Garland, which circulated yesterday, Monday, among rank-and-file federal law enforcement agents. The Washington Post reviewed a copy of the 4-page memo addressed to the heads of the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the DEA, the U.S. Marshal Service, and the Bureau of Prisons. Garland wrote in the memo that the guidance aims to keep the official policies of those agencies, which are arms of the Justice Department, up to date with current training and practices of federal law enforcement. The policy, which is slated to take effect July 19th, does not compel state and local police or federal law enforcement agencies outside the Justice Department to follow a similar standard. The duty to intervene language grew out of recommendations made years ago by law enforcement groups. Garland's memo makes clear that federal law enforcement officers also have a duty to act if they see someone who needs medical care, stating, officers will be trained in and must recognize and act upon the affirmative duty to request and or render medical aid as appropriate where needed. All right, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Emily Schwing. Oil and water, apples and oranges, fire and ice. None of these things really seem like they have much to do with one another. Or do they?
We found that more fire-favorable weather associated with declines in the Arctic sea ice during summer can increase autumn wildfires over the western United States.
Hailong Wang is an earth scientist at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in Washington State.
So we analyzed a few decades of observations on wildfire incidents, sea ice cover, and weather conditions to identify a relationship between Arctic sea ice declining and the wildfire risks. We call it a teleconnection.
Wang says this idea of a fire and ice teleconnection, it's not new. It's a lot like the so-called butterfly effect, a term coined by meteorologist Edward Lorenz in the 1960s to explain chaos theory. The idea can be summarized like this. If a butterfly flaps its wings in one location, that could displace enough air to cause a tornado or some other large-scale atmospheric storm elsewhere.
Yeah, we certainly didn't invent this concept, but it has been in the atmospheric sciences for a long time. So because of the connections within the Earth system, especially in the atmosphere, one small change in one region could affect other regions through the atmospheric circulation.
Connections between declining sea ice and wildfire weather have been made before. Wang says previous findings have relied heavily on statistical relationships.
For example, they find that Arctic sea ice are declining in many years, and they also found increase in extreme weather like wildfires in the western U.S.
But they couldn't explain the cause and effect. So Wang and colleagues took those known statistical relationships one step further. The team applied them to a state-of-the-art climate model with wildfire prediction capabilities.
In that way, we were able to identify the response of the climate system, including the fire weather over the western U.S. and other responses to the Arctic sea ice.
What they found is a tale of two vortices.
So when the summer sea ice is much reduced, ocean can absorb and store more heat from sunlight. Less sea ice cover over the Arctic will allow more heat also to be released from the ocean to the atmosphere in the following autumn and early winter. Otherwise, the sea ice can insulate the heat from the ocean to the air.
So more heat's released to the atmosphere as the sea ice declines.
The anomalous heat in the Arctic can form rising air from the surface, and that can strengthen the low pressure system, which is one of the spinning vortex. It's counterclockwise.
This forms a low pressure system, and Wang says when it moves south, it pushes the polar jet stream off its normal course and forms a second vortex.
So this shift also facilitates the formation of a high pressure system over the western U.S. This high pressure system is a clockwise spinning vortex. This drives dry and hot air to descend to the ground from the upper air to the ground. Normally it comes with clear skies and no precipitation. So those are all favorable weather conditions for wildfire hazards.
The findings are published in Nature Communications, and Wang says wildfire might not be the only result of declining sea ice.
The Arctic changes could also be connected to extreme cold weather.
Like the infamous 2021 Texas ice and snowstorm that knocked out power to millions and caused billions of dollars in damage. Wang says looking for more teleconnections is where his research will go next.
So moving forward, we like to explore more connections of Arctic changes to extreme weather, climate change over other regions of the entire globe along that direction.
If wildfires and sea ice could be this climatically entwined, surely there are other climate surprises just waiting to be unraveled. For 60 Second Science, I'm Emily Schwing.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Right before our eyes, an invaluable American species is fast disappearing from view. Cartoonus americanus. These are newspaper cartoonists who've long delighted readers and infuriated power elites. And there's nothing natural about their sudden decline. It's not the result of a dwindling talent pool and certainly not due to a lack of political targets. Rather, what's happening is that their media habitat is being intentionally destroyed. Around the start of the 20th century, some 2,000 newspapers featured their own full-time cartoonists. But in just the last decade, those healthy media environments have shriveled. So now, only a couple of dozen newspapers have these vibrant artistic journalists on staff. One major reason is that most U.S. papers have been gobbled up by profiteering hedge funds that have merged, purged, and plundered these essential local sources of news and democratic discourse. The overriding interest of these Wall Street owners is to cash out a paper's financial assets and haul off the booty to boost their personal wealth. Journalism and democracy be damned. Thus, they view cartoonists as a paycheck that can be easily diverted into their corporate pockets, dismissing the fact that enjoying good local cartoonists ranks as one of the top reasons people give for buying the paper. Note that this mass extermination is not old-school media censorship, but sleight-of-hand money censorship by the new monopolistic order of newspapering. Political cartoonists are still free to express any opinion they want, but the Wall Street system locks them out of their primary marketplace. Censorship is ugly, but eliminating paychecks, well, that's just business. This is Jim Hightower saying, yet these freewheeling spirits of the cartooning craft are inventing new ways to connect with America's strong demand for their fun and important work. To connect with them, go to editorialcartoonist.com.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Persuaded that his election would help cement support for the new government, George Washington reluctantly agreed to serve as the nation's first president. He likened his feelings on once again taking up the burdens of public service to those of a culprit who is going to the place of his execution. Washington was inaugurated first president of the United States on April 30th, 1789. He served 2 terms, guiding the new government through the organization of the executive branch, founding the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., opening the West for settlement, and establishing precedents that have influenced the conduct of succeeding presidents ever since. Constitutions do not become real without the institutions necessary to implement them. It fell primarily to Washington to give flesh and blood to the executive branch and the national government generally during the first critical years. That's all for today's podcast. 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
If and when the Supreme Court reverses Roe, who will suffer? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. And the list of who will suffer is a long list that includes victims of rape, victims of incest, victims of domestic violence, teenagers, low-income workers, women of color, immigrants without documents, really all members of marginalized groups. In contrast, for the wealthy, the right to choose will, for the most part, remain relatively intact. They will be able to access that health care. They will have the wherewithal to travel. That's obviously not the case for women who literally can't afford to miss work, for single moms who can't leave their kids, for women who don't have money to travel and live in a state that has criminalized buying abortion pills. What are they to do? Studies show that women unable to access abortion disproportionately are women of color, who, denied an abortion, are much more likely to live in poverty, be unemployed, and be unable to escape violent male partners. In addition, a nationwide abortion ban, one study shows, would increase pregnancy-related deaths by 21%, 33% among black women, who already are 2.5 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. Which means that overruling Roe may well initiate a death spiral for women, as well as a potential death spiral for constitutional rights. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1883. The 8th wonder of the world, the Brooklyn Bridge, opened for traffic. 600 men worked on the project, which took 14 years to complete. Between 20 and 30 men died working on the bridge. This included the bridge's designer, German-born John A. Roebling. Roebling was visiting the site, taking compass readings, when his foot was accidentally crushed. And although his toes were amputated, he later died of tetanus. Some of the most harrowing work for the project had to be completed under the East River. The bridge's stone towers were to stand on top of caissons. These were wooden boxes with no bottoms that would be filled with concrete. Men known as sandhogs had the job of digging until they hit bedrock to rest the caissons. The underwater boxes were dimly lit by gas lights. If the sandhogs came up too quickly, they risked getting the bends. A 15-year-old Irish immigrant described the work, saying, "When the air was fully compressed, the door of the airlock opened at a touch, and we all went down to work with pick and shovel on the gravelly bottom. My headache soon became acute. The 6 of us were working naked to the waist in a small iron chamber with a temperature of about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. In 5 minutes, the sweat was pouring from us, and all the while we were standing in icy water that was only kept from rising by the terrific air pressure. No wonder the headaches were blinding." Due to this incredible labor, the bridge finally opened. In the first 24 hours, 150,000 people crossed the new bridge. More than 125 years later, the Brooklyn Bridge still stands as one of the most iconic man-made structures in the U.S.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 55 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high in the mid-80s. Sunshine with a few clouds throughout the day, and winds will be out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight with lows in the low to mid 50s, and winds will be out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Then generally sunny tomorrow despite a few afternoon clouds with highs near 90 and maybe above here at the mothership. Well, winds will be out of the north at 5 to 10. And, later on in the week, it looks like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, Memorial Day weekend, we may have some copious amounts of rain falling, at least on Saturday and Sunday. We'll see how that ferrets out as we get closer to the weekend. As you know, we have not had our update on coronavirus confirmed cases and confirmed deceased. So we will just jump ahead here and tell you that grass pollen remains very high, though the air quality index for the region is good at 34 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is very high at level 8. So I know it's like a broken record, but you better slather on the SPF, the highest that you have, and then cover up. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.1 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 90%. Oh, heat! Humidity! Sounds tropical. Is it? Well, we're a bit inland, but we still have a giant ocean not too far away. Not too far. All right. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. That's what the Weather Underground does. Indeed. London is 62 degrees and partly cloudy. Gay Paris is 66 and partly cloudy. Rome is 83 and fair. Kyiv is 70 degrees and partly cloudy. Kabul is 68 and clear. Hong Kong is 78 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 68 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 56 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees and sunny. And New York is 62 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi told Britain there could be no U.S.-UK trade deal if it proceeds with plans to unilaterally scrap some of the rules governing trade with Northern Ireland. Britain warned EU authorities this week that it could discard post-Brexit regulations that were painstakingly negotiated with Brussels, including border checks on some goods shipped from mainland Britain to Northern Ireland. The trade protocol aims to keep the British-run province, which borders EU member Ireland, in both the United Kingdom's customs territory and the EU single market. Pelosi said she viewed the existing agreement as essential to maintaining the 1998 Good Friday peace deal brokered by the United States to end 3 decades of conflict in Northern Ireland between Catholic nationalist militants and pro-British Protestant paramilitaries, in which around 3,600 people were killed. The United Kingdom chooses to undermine the Good Friday Accords. The Congress cannot and will not support a bilateral free trade agreement, Pelosi said in a statement. Britain says it is acting in the interests of preserving the Good Friday deal. Boris Johnson's spokesman welcomed Pelosi's commitment to preserving the peace deal and said a U.S. congressional delegation will meet Britain's foreign and trade minister in coming days to discuss the planned changes to the protocol. And of course, Northern Ireland remains deeply split along sectarian lines.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Jamie Keaton of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The head of the UN World Food Program is telling billionaires it's time to step up as the global threat of food insecurity rises, with Russia's war in Ukraine, saying he's seen encouraging signs from some of the world's richest people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Agency Executive Director David Beasley built upon a social media back and forth he had with Musk last year when the Tesla CEO challenged policy advocates to show how a $6 billion donation sought by the UN agency could solve world hunger. And then, of course, the agency presented that. What happened? Well, Musk put $6 billion into a foundation, Beasley told the AP. But everybody thought it came to us, but we ain't gotten any of it yet. And Beasley told the AP that at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where, some of the world's biggest elites and billionaires have gathered, and they don't ski. I got to tell you, I've been to Davos, and it's a fabulous ski place. Come on, get on the slopes. I don't know what it's going to take, he said of Musk. We're trying every angle, Hey, Ellen, we need your help, Beasley pleaded. Musk and Bezos did not immediately respond to emails or other messages seeking comment. Of course they wouldn't. And, when a billionaire says they're going to give you some money for food, it's usually just food for thought. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.